Hey, welcome to my Ruby Life Pool's Mythic Dungeon Guide. In this video, I'll extensively cover the abilities of all enemies you will face in a Ruby Life Pool's run. Ruby Life Pools is the easiest and shortest dungeon among the new Dragonflight dungeons, so this should be quick. I'll be making a dungeon guide on all 8 of the slated Mythic Plus dungeons for Dragonflight Season 1, so be sure to subscribe if you want to catch those. Just like with my Shadowlands guides, I'll be marking important or impactful mob abilities in red, and less important abilities in green. Additionally, I will be marking out abilities with their associated counterplay, including magic effects, enrages, curses, interrupts, bleeds for Draktheirs, and poisons or diseases. Let's begin. The dungeon can be separated into 3 short portions, each with 5 unique units and 1 boss. So we make our way and kill the first set of trash in the dungeon. You enter the dungeon and you are standing before a lone primal juggernaut. The juggernaut only casts 2 abilities. The first is Excavating Blast, where they throw a projectile which spawns a large AoE that deals damage through jagged earth. You'll want to move out of it. Their other ability is a single target tank hit, Crushing Smash. Not too complicated. Past that juggernaut, you face 2 new mobs. I would pull these 2 with the 3 units standing right through the doorway, so this would make it a pack of 5. Among the pack of 5 are 3 unique mobs, the first of which is the Flash Frost Earthshaper. The Earthshaper only casts 1 ability called Tectonic Slam, which deals group-wide damage after a short cast. You should probably stun this to stop it, as it can be a lot of damage. Next is the Primal Terra Sentry. The Terra Sentry only casts 1 ability as well, called Stone Missile. It targets a random player, and after a short delay, releases a bolt, which deals significant damage and knocks players away. You'll want to sidestep it if you see the AoE around you. And finally, the Flash Frost Chillweaver. The Chillweaver mostly casts Ice Bolt, an interruptible direct damage ability. You may, however, want to save your interrupt for their other ability, Ice Shield. They begin channeling 3 ticks of an Ice Shield on a random enemy. This grants that enemy a large shield. You'll want to interrupt this as soon as you can, but the first tick cannot be kicked, so you'll either have to destroy or dispel their shield. That makes up the majority of the mobs in this room. Around the room you might see a few stray whelps and a lot of eggs. Stepping over these eggs will hatch them, spawning 1 new whelp. The whelps themselves don't do very much, only casting Cold Claws, dealing some frost damage to their current target. At the end of the hallway, you face another juggernaut, nothing new. But behind that juggernaut is the last mob of this area, Defier Dragar. Dragar is a lieutenant, and he casts 2 abilities. Blazing Rush is an ability where they turn and after a short cast, charge in the direction they're facing. If they're facing you, you'll just want to step aside. Their other ability is Steel Barrage, which is a set of rapid strikes on the tank. Each hit launches a ground projectile out, which you'll want to dodge. Tanks might want to beware of the rapid damage. Note that this lieutenant has True Sight, so you can't stealth around him. With that, we make our way to the first boss of the dungeon, Melidrussa Chillworm. Chillworm has quite a few abilities. The first is Hail Bombs. She'll throw out ground projectiles on all players, leaving behind spiky ice. You'll want to sidestep these when they come out. Throughout the fight, Chillworm will shoot a damage projectile at the tank through the ability Frigid Shard. Now the important stuff. Her first important ability is Chillstorm. Chillstorm selects a random DPS and places a circle around them. After a few seconds, it will drop on that player's position and begin sucking all players into it. This vortex deals continuous damage to all players, and significantly more damage when standing inside it. At the end of its duration, any players caught inside will be hit by lethal damage and knocked away. If you have this circle forming around you, you'll want to put it to the side so it doesn't interfere with other players. The next important ability is Awaken Whelps. At fixed time intervals, the boss will begin to channel it at a group of eggs located around the room. Upon completion, a large group of whelps will spawn. Tanks will want to aggressively damage these whelps to pick up threat. DPS may want to be careful with their DPS, as you might pull aggro if you do too much damage too early. And finally, frequently but not always, the boss follows up Awaken Whelps with her final ability Ice Bulwark and Frost Overload. She gains a large shield, which prevents her from being interrupted. She then begins to channel Frost Overload, dealing significant damage every 2 seconds. You'll want to send as much damage as you can here, as it is a lot of incoming damage. Then you'll want to interrupt the boss the second the shield falls. And that's all for the first boss. You then make your way up the Ruby Life Pools where you face the trash before Blazehoof. The trash are spread out in a large ring around the area and contain 4 large blaze-bound destroyers that all need to be defeated to activate the boss. Going right or left doesn't matter as it is a ring. Among the mobs you'll encounter, the first will be the Scorchling. Scorchlings only cast Burning Touch on the tank, applying a stacking magic dot. You'll want to wait until all Scorchlings have cast before dispelling your tank. Then you may face Flame Dancers. Flame Dancers don't do very much. They cast Blaze of Glory occasionally, dealing fair damage over 4 seconds to the tank. Additionally, at the end of those 4 seconds, they explode, dealing some damage to the whole party. Upon death, the Flame Dancer begins to cast Blaze of Glory, spinning wildly, dealing significant damage to players within 3 yards for 8 seconds. Additionally, they shoot out multiple ground projectiles, lots to dodge, so watch your feet. Cinder Weavers are another mob you might face. They primarily frequently cast Cinderbolt, a direct damage projectile at a random player. You'll want to interrupt this as it can deal a fair amount of damage, especially at higher keys. They also occasionally buff themselves with Burning Ambition, granting them a 50% damage buff, but increasing their damage taken by 25%. Next are the Blazebound Destroyers. Blazebound Destroyers are by far the scariest mob in this area, but you need to kill them to activate the boss. Their first ability is Living Bomb. They place a circle around the player, and after a few seconds it explodes, dealing significant damage to that player and others in a small radius. Try to isolate yourself when you're hit by this. They only cast one other ability called Inferno. Inferno has a short cast, after which it deals significant damage to the whole party. In addition to this damage, it also applies a dot component, which also deals good damage. This combination of abilities makes Blazebound Destroyers extremely dangerous, and should always be approached with caution. And finally, upon death, the Destroyer begins to cast Burnout, dealing lethal damage to anyone caught in a large radius. Walk out of it before it goes off. Along the inner part of the donut, you may find Primalist Shockcasters. They primarily frequently cast Lightning Bolt, which deals direct damage to a random player. You'll want to interrupt this. They also cast Unlucky Strike, applied to a random player. It deals damage throughout its duration, and at its end, it deals significant damage to that unit, stunning it for 1 second. You'll want to decurse this if possible. And finally, this unit has an energy bar. At 100 energy, the Shockcaster explodes, dealing damage and knocking back all players within 20 yards. Keep an eye on this, as it may push you into other new mobs. That's all the normal mobs in the area, but there are 2 mini-boss dragons that can be dangerous. The first among them is Thunderhead. Thunderhead is found to the left from the stairs. They cast 3 abilities. The first and most important for DPS is Storm Breath. Thunderhead turns to a random player and begins to breathe lightning. This deals a lethal amount of damage, so when you see the dragon turn to face you, run. Their next ability is Thunderjaw, dealing damage and knocking back the tank a fair distance, so watch your positioning tanks. And finally, they cast Rolling Thunder, applying a magic dot on 2 players. Expiration or removal of this debuff results in a burst of damage, so be sure to heal this, healers. Rolling Thunder is the only unavoidable bit of damage that the group will take here. The other dragon is Flame Gullet. On the opposite position in the circle, you will find this dragon. When fighting other mobs or walking by his position, he may just drop from the sky and start to breathe fire on your team. Watch your back for this. Their moveset is quite similar to Thunderhead. Flame Gullet turns to a random player and breathes, so dodge that. Flame Gullet then casts on the tank Fire Maw, dealing significant damage instantly without a cast, and applies a dot that does heavy damage. Mitigation and healing is useful here. At 50% health, Flame Gullet casts Molten Blood, continuously dealing pulsing damage for the rest of its lifetime. This pulse increases in damage by 80% after every pulse. You're on a timer to kill Flame Gullet before this damage overwhelms the party. It's for this reason Flame Gullet is significantly more dangerous than Thunderhead. Otherwise, after defeating all 4 Blazebound Destroyers, you can finally make your way towards the second boss, Kokia Blazehoof. Blazehoof is a boss that's mechanically quite simple. Their first ability is Ritual of Blaze Binding. A large radius will be marked on a random player, and a large explosion will occur after a few seconds. This deals damage and spawns a blaze-bound firestorm. These firestorms are just like the destroyers we fought earlier. They cast Inferno, dealing a lot of damage and applying a dot, but they also cast Roaring Blaze after that. This can be interrupted and should be interrupted. It deals a fair amount of group-wide damage. Firestorms are an absolute priority to kill when they are up. Upon death, they also explode, dealing significant damage to players caught in a large radius. but they also leave a large pool of fire, effectively reducing the amount of space you have to work with. Blazehoof also casts Searing Boulder, turning towards a random player and unleashing a boulder, which rolls and leaves behind flame patches. Players will want to try to strategically face them towards areas already covered by fire. If you don't, you might find yourself running out of space as the fight progresses. And finally, Blazehoof casts on the tank Searing Blows, a set of 3 strikes that each apply 1 stack of searing wounds. The flame patches last quite a while, but they do eventually disappear, so use your space wisely. And that's it. Now we make our way to the last boss, Stromvein. It's a pretty short path to the final boss, and among the mobs you see, the first will be a Storm Warrior. They only have one ability, Thunderclap. Thunderclap is a short cast that applies a debuff, which slows and reduces haste by 10%. Melee DPS will want to step out of it to avoid this debuff. However, a more effective tactic is to stun these warriors instead. The lack of mechanics from these mobs make them easy to pull into other packs. All around the area, you will see some primal thunderclouds, small adds with a shield that covers 65% of their health. While the shield is up, they will act as a normal mob does, meleeing their target. When the shield breaks, they begin to cast Crackling Detonation. Upon finishing the cast, they kamikaze at a random player, exploding for some damage upon reaching the destination. Sidestep these explosions. Note that the shields are also dispellable. Then you may face Tempest Channelers. They are probably the most dangerous mobs here, with exception of the miniboss. They primarily cast Thunderbolt on their current target, the tank. They may also occasionally summon 1 Primal Thundercloud. Their dangerous ability is Lightning Storm. They will deal unavoidable, continuous damage for 6 full seconds. This is a lot of damage, so prepare for this with defensives and good healing. While not quite as dangerous, there's another channeler called the Flame Channeler. Most of their damage is avoidable. Their dangerous ability is Flash Fire. After a short channel, they laser beam a random player, dealing significant damage to that player and any other player within 5 yards. This also heals the channeler and does a lot of damage, so you'll want to interrupt this as soon as you can. Their other ability is Burning Veins, increasing their haste by 50%, though this also does damage to the channeler over time. So mages, if you steal this, beware of that damage. You can dispel this. As long as the group is aware of your interrupts, Flame Channelers should be very manageable and one of the easier mobs among the others here. And finally, the last mini-boss that needs to be killed before you summon the last boss is High Channeler Raivati. Raivati is a juiced up Tempest Channeler. Their direct damage cast also additionally applies a dot. When Raivati summons Thunderclouds, they summon multiple instead of just 1. They have Lightning Storm as well, which remains unchanged. But they also have a new ability called Tempest Storm Shield. This is a 3-second cast where Raivati absorbs the Tempest barriers from any nearby thunderclouds. Raivati will then begin to complete a full cast. When they successfully complete their full cast, if any shield is still up, that shield will be destroyed, and the whole party will take damage equal to that shield's value. If you don't burst the shield down, this can potentially be a team wipe, so keep an eye out for this ability. And that's the last of the trash, and we make our way to the final boss. This boss has a lot of mechanics, so bear with me. This final boss fight involves 2 enemies, Erkhart, Stromvein, and Kairaka. The fight begins with Kairaka jumping around, breathing fire. Kairaka can't be taunted in this portion of the fight, so just sidestep the fire. Erkhart doesn't do very much. They cast Storm Slime on the tank, applying a debuff that causes the tank to take 100% more damage from nature sources. This stacks and healers should dispel this immediately. Erkhart also casts Winds of Change, dealing slight damage to the whole party and pushing all players in a specified direction. This also pushes all flame patches created by the abilities of Kairaka, so be sure not to step in those. As for Kairaka, in the first portion of this fight, they only do one thing in addition to breathing fire. They cast Flame Spit on 1 player. This applies 3 stacks of Inferno Core on that player. Inferno Core actually does quite a bit of damage over its duration. Upon expiration or dispel, all players within 5 yards of that player takes a fair amount of damage. You'll want to stay lightly spread out for this. In addition to the damage, for every stack of Inferno Core, a Flaming Ember will spawn, a small pool of fire. Stepping into the Flaming Ember will apply another stack of Inferno Core for every tick of damage you take. Wow, that is a lot of damage. This fight can be extremely chaotic if you build up too many of these Inferno Core stacks. As mentioned earlier, these flame patches dropped by Inferno Core can be pushed away by Erkhart's Winds of Change. there is a lot of outgoing damage in this fight, especially in the second phase of this fight. When Erkhart reaches 60% health, they beckon Kairaka down and they fight together. The fight largely remains the same with one stark difference. Instead of applying Flame Spit on one player, whenever Kairaka does it, they apply Flame Spit to all players. This grants all players 3 stacks of Inferno Core, and significantly amplifies the amount of group damage that comes out. It is a race to defeat this boss before you are overwhelmed by the damage. Most groups, I imagine, would save Lust for here, and when the dragon drops, burn it down, and giving little attention to Erkhart. And that's the whole dungeon. It's a relatively short dungeon that looks like it's going to be lots of fun in Mythic Plus. I make these videos to give players a full overview of the dungeons, as I myself like to be well informed of dungeon mechanics. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next dungeon guide.